let's get on to misunderstandings. I mean, one minute we're celebrating the release of Julian Assange after years of torture by the British. The next we have Meta Zuckerberg claiming that the Biden-Harris administration pressured Facebook to break, the First Amendment, arguably. And then the French have, de facto kidnapped Telegram's Pavel Durov. He's out on bail or something now. I mean, are things worse now than when you were documenting censorship in the Twitter files years after the event?
Unquestionably. Yeah, no. This moment in time, especially the arrest and detention of Durov, is a paradigm-shifting moment in, I think, the history of kind of free expression in the West. There have been rumors and threats, and there's been a lot of saber rattling in the direction of people like Elon Musk ever since the passage of the Digital Services Act in Europe, to the effect of you must comply or else there will be crippling penalties. But the detention aspect of it is something that's completely new, coupled with threats by former national security executives like Alexander Vindman here in the States after Durov's arrest.
Remind us who Vindman is, actually. And he tweeted out or something just on the news that Durov had been captured by French security forces?
Yeah, so he's a former White House official, former National Security Council member, former diplomat. He kind of rose to prominence during the first impeachment of Donald Trump as a witness against Trump in that affair. He's been, prominently involved with the Ukraine drama. But he tweeted after Durov's arrest that Elon Musk better take care, essentially, that, he better watch out after this news, because there is a growing appetite for accountability around the world. And that suggests that it's not just in Europe that he's talking about, and that is what's eye-opening.
I mean, many people commenting on the fact that Western Europe has appeared to be suicidal in its attempt to support Washington policy on the proxy war through Ukraine. Is this the United States behind the scenes acting to attack Durov ahead of a U.S. election in November? And how would we find out?
It would be very difficult to find out. I've heard so many theories about what actually happened in the last 3 or 4 days. There are a lot of people who believe that it's specifically connected to the war in Ukraine, that there are issues that the United States military or NATO has with communications on Telegram. But in the bigger picture, it really doesn't matter. There's a perception issue here, which is that whether he was, arrested because of local French violations, which is what the French government claims, whether it was for falling afoul of the DSA, as some European officials hinted at before his arrest, or whether it was something else, all the tech executives have been generally on notice for a while now that they are going to be held accountable in one way or another for the behavior of their own customers. And this is just it's a symbolic moment where somebody is clearly being held accountable for things that he didn't do, but that almost certainly is going on inside his platform. And
your colleagues, should I use that word? I don't know. There's no honor amongst thieves. Journalists don't seem to, the Salzburger family's New York Times, your paper of note, treating it a bit like a joke. It says, 13 years later, Durov's anti-establishment streaks appears to have gotten him into a fresh round of trouble. And, it even it talks about Snowden being in Moscow after disclosing classified information. Why do they think it's some kind of joke in the United States that a postman, basically, because I suppose Durov running Telegram, he's like a postman or a post office, being detained for what people use the post office for, is not incredibly serious?
Afshan, I'm really at the end of my rope trying to explain the total indifference of the national news media here in America and abroad, frankly. But we, especially in the United States, where we have a very specific free speech tradition, It's the most powerful protections for journalists that any country has ever had, and it's a core value in the American system. Journalists have been raised to protect those values at all costs, even if the rights of somebody they vehemently disagree with, are infringed upon. They've always come to that person's defense until Donald Trump got elected, and suddenly there's been this sea change, even in the business. I grew up in the mainstream media. I worked at Rolling Stone for 15 years. I've written for countless publications here in the States. And there's been just this amazing shift in the way people look at free speech. They seem to think it's not going to ever, come to their door, these problems, when actually journalists historically are going to be the first in line to encounter problems when, the hammer finally comes down. And they just don't seem to get it.
And you single out in your latest Substack NPR, Politico, the BBC, state-run BBC, which is already at the center of storms of sexual allegations against children, actually, but which really is, when it comes to the BBC, as rolling their eyes at allegations that now turn out to be true because Zuckerberg of Meta, of all people, appears to be frightened as the boss of Rumble after Durov's detention in France.
Yeah, and the significance of Zuckerberg's letter, and there are a lot of people who have been heavily critical of Mark Zuckerberg for a variety of reasons over the years, but on Monday he put out a letter. It was a letter to the Judiciary Committee Chairman, Jim Jordan, here in the States, essentially saying two big things. Number one, I was pressured to censor by the Biden administration. He used that word censor. And number two, the FBI led Facebook and Meta to believe that a story involving Hunter Biden and Burisma was Russian disinformation, and essentially the company avoided or demoted that story as a result of that. But the crucial part of that letter was his use of the word censor, because and this goes back to reporting that I've done from the Twitter files. I kept using that word because in my mind, whenever the government is working with a media distributor to suppress information, as they did in the case of the Hunter Biden story, that's censorship. One fact check after another kept saying that was false. This was not censorship. This was just communication between the government and private companies exercising their free First Amendment rights to free speech. Even after email surfaced where the White House was saying things to Meta like, we would like you to get moving on removing a post by RFK Jr. ASAP, they still wouldn't use the word. Now they must use the word. I think they have to, because somebody like Zuckerberg, it's clear that he at least perceived this activity as pressure to censor. So what else could it possibly be?
And to be clear, the significance of this is the US Constitution says the government cannot clamp down on free speech. So while Facebook is allowed to clamp down on free speech, it can't if it becomes entwined with the government. So how quickly can something be moved to indict the Biden-Harris administration and the previous Trump administration, presumably, as regards the violation of the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution?
Well, it would have to be legislation first. I mean, well, you wouldn't need legislation. There would need to be a court case. There would need to be a suit. It would probably have to be resolved civilly. There is one that's already in existence and will probably work its way back to the Supreme Court. It's called Murphy v. Missouri. One of the primary plaintiffs is Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who is the person that Mark Zuckerberg was referring to when, or was one of the people when he was talked about being pressured to censor. We obviously do have the First Amendment, which has a very different conception of speech rights than Europe does. Our idea is that speech rights are inherent; people are born with them, and the government's role is to protect those rights. It's to prevent other people from infringing on them. It does not have a role in cleaning up the information landscape. It does not have a role in policing misinformation. That is not how things are designed under the U.S. Constitution. In Europe, for instance, they have hate speech laws. The concept is that rights flow from the government. We see it another way. It would be interesting to see a legal challenge now that Zuckerberg has made that admission, because it's just such a powerful word to use, and I think it would change public perception about any case that goes forward.
Which is why you said it was good news, no matter how bad it is for Durov, presumably, or Elon Musk visiting Western Europe anytime soon.